I'm just going to tell you a little bit about myself, which will help you understand how I came to do what I did. That I'm an anthropologist primarily, but secondarily a public health specialist. And I've worked in West Africa. I'm currently working in Mesoamerica among Belizean Mayans. And I've also worked in the Dominican Republic. I seem to go back and forth along certain latitudes, which means I'm eating a lot of rice and beans a lot wherever I go, and a lot of hot sauce. I've been here now 11 years. I enjoy teaching courses in peoples and cultures of Latin America. I teach a theory course. I teach, some of my students are here from my intro course, and I'm really thankful that you're here. It's an honor to have you. I'm very busy in my life. I'm writing a book which I'm going to sign because I gotta supplement in future years. This is a book on Mayans in Belize and looking at issues of globalization. I think that's primarily, let me just tell you a little bit about how I came to work in West Africa, and that'll give you somewhat of an idea, a little bit more you'll know about me. I was working in South Carolina, University of South Carolina, and my friend Debbie Glick said, Andy, you want to go to Africa? So, Africa? I don't know anything about Africa. We were working on this grant together for the International Office of Health Promotion because I was working before I came here in anthropology in a program of health promotion and education. And I said, well, I knew Africa and Latin America, they're kind of shaped similarly. And there were similar problems in development, but I didn't know a lot about Africa. I've taken a course where African ethnography, the peoples and cultures of Africa in college, but I didn't know much about it. I said, okay, Debbie, I'll go, but I don't even know French, which is the language there. And she said, oh, she's typical Debbie Glick. She waved her hand, you'll do fine. And this was a month away, so I sat down with some student in the college from Benin or Benin, depending upon how French you want to sound. And I resuscitated a year or two of French, which I learned in high school. And when I got to Guinea, West Africa, and you'll see where that is in just a moment, I tried to talk French, but Spanish used to come out with a little bit of French. And I get very, very frustrated, and everybody was convinced this guy must be Italian because he's just too emotional. I was so damn frustrated. But I managed to get through it, and I was there for 24 days. And it was probably the most exciting work that I had ever done. I was so impressed by my colleagues there who I was working with. I'd never been with people who worked quite so hard, who were so acute, so really on task all the time. And also the country was a very interesting place when I got there. It was 1988, the first time I was there. And which means it was about 3 years into what basically was a period of freedom. That is, prior to that, up until the latter part of 1984, they were utterly dominated by some guy by the name of Sékou Touré, whom you may not have heard of. Most likely, well, I didn't know much about Sékou Touré until I got there. And Sékou Touré kept a lid on the country. If anybody painted their house, there was immediately an investigation. Where did you get money for the paint? There was a camp that he had which was called Camp Boiro, where all the political prisoners went, and some of them didn't get out, and the ones who did get out were very often terribly, terribly, terribly mangled. There was a very rigid Marxist government, and the country was sort of like sealed off, like you close a jar. And I was there in 1988. Everything was opening up. It was just, the place was just coming alive. And I went. There were cafes were opening. There was 2 restaurants in the whole city of about 500,000. But restaurants were opening. I remember one evening I was out. Third or fourth night I was there, and sitting down with some mix, but basically they're Africans, and all of a sudden Billie Holiday starts playing. I thought, my God, you know, this really is the globalization, that they're really part of the rest of the universe. And people were coming back from Paris who had left the country during these 30 years of tyranny. They were coming from New York, they were coming from London, they were coming from Ivory Coast, they were coming from Dakar, Senegal. They were coming back to build a nation. And one night, I remember I was going there was the opening of they were putting up a satellite tower at the PTT, the Post Telephone and Telegraph, and there was a party there, and it was just terrific. Anyway, I had so much fun, and I learned so much. And one of the things you find, if any of you have the good fortune to live or work or visit in Africa, as one scholar once said, every time an old African person dies, it's like a library burns. And this is Ampateba. And talking with people there and the extraordinary sense they have of their history, of the legends they can tell you, the family stories, observations on life. I mean, it's such an oral and reflective society. It doesn't mean that they're all the same, but there are these qualities of, you know, oral traditions, and everybody, it seems like everybody is a historian, and everybody knows key facts of their background. And one background that I became particularly acutely aware of was that of the Fulani when I was there in 1988. I remember I was walking around the city. I walked all over the city. At this point it was 1988 and it was still safe. The Conakry had not joined the rest of the world and become dangerous. And I came across, I was in this one area called Dixine. And Dixine is an interesting community, neighborhood, quartier as they call it, within Conakry, because there's one half of it is Dixine Fula, which is where the Fulani is, and the other half of it is Dixine Susu, where the Susu people are, very different people. One of the things when you go to Africa that you'll find, and I hope you all go there, is that, you know, you can have an ethnic group here. They call them ethnic groups in West Africa. In East Africa they say tribes. You say someone's a tribal person in West Africa, they're going to want to slug you. What are you, making me a primitive? Anyway, the difference between let's say the Susu and the Fulani in one group and another is as radical as the difference of Norwegians and Sicilians. There is no plausible or immediate understanding of that which I would see as a African personality worldview, and for that matter maybe not an African childhood. As one person who became very famous wrote a book called The African Child Camera Lai. I have trouble with this. Anyway, I was very struck by the diversity, and there was something interesting, particularly that intrigued me about the Fulani people. The music was just not like any other music of the area. You couldn't dance to it. I was sure it had a lot of Saharan, North African influences. People looked very different. They had a different sort of air, a different personality, and people would speak. Other Africans would say, do any of you? Well, I'll use just a little bit of the French here. The l'air du peul, the air of a certain air to the Fulani. There was a different kind of presence, a different sort of mentality, and I thought, if I come back here, this is one of the things I want to know about. I want to know about the Fulani people. And it worked out that way. Anyway, I was there in 1988 for 24 days, and I decided, gee, I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to come back here and work. And in 4 years' time, I had what we have in the university professors have, which is a sabbatical year, in which you can take off time to go off and do your own thing, to do your research. And I thought, well, I'm going to come back here during my sabbatical, and, you know, being a little bit cagey now and then, I went to the director of the Institut Pédagogique, the National Pedagogical Institute, and said, look, I'd like you to invite me to come here and for this letter to go to the Fulbright Commission, which give you a lot of grants to go and study abroad, or alternatively, they give people abroad grants to come and study here. So I got my Fulbright. I took it on my sabbatical, and I stayed a year. And it was so productive and interesting, I said to the Fulbright people, hey, can I stay here another half year? Well, yeah. I called up my university. They said, you can do that. So I stayed there a year and a half, and then I kept going back. I've been back and forth to Africa for one or another reason about 20, 25 times. So I think I know what I'm talking about some of the time. And my challenge is today for you to know what I'm saying and to try to be a little bit interesting to you. I've not just worked there as a researcher. I was a teacher at the university, and I've consulted with for a variety of, the UN, World Health Organization, organizations like that, in getting my work done. So I know the society from a variety of different ways. I was there with my family, my very young children at the time. My daughter, by the way, it's very interesting. She was, how old was she there? She was about 12 or 11. And I used to let her walk around the streets, go everywhere. And I figured, she'll be fine, she'll be fine. And then one day she came to me and she, was convinced that I didn't care about her, I didn't love her. And I said, well, why do you feel this way, Rebecca? And Rebecca said, well, Felipe Mantega, all the others make sure that their daughters are home, but you let me go anywhere. You must not care about me. But I just knew intuitively, if she was out on the streets, people would take care of her. They would protect her. They protect people. And that's, maybe if one can say something about much of Africa, that one wouldn't want to say it all. There is a sense of communality and humanity such that children are protected, older people are cared for, people in trouble are reached out for. I've been to parts of the world where I just felt I could die on the street and people wouldn't mind. Now, Guinea at this point was an interesting place because there were no homeless people there. No homeless people. Everybody had someplace to go. And it was also a very fluid society. I remember one Friday afternoon, I was teaching up at the University of Kankan. I'm giving you all these place names and this sort of thing. And once you see the map, you'll understand where some of these places are. Good afternoon. I was teaching up at the University of Kankan, and I prepared some food for my children and myself. And someone comes into the little house I was staying in, and he sits down. Fine. He takes some rice out of the bowl, and some sauce. I think I had some fish. He eats, and he leaves. This is fine. This is, there's such a fluidity. If there's a rice bowl, people can join in. There's not this sense of this is mine and that's yours. Okay, let me get into some of the material of my talk today, so you can feel that you know something as a result of having been here, not just know about myself. Janice, I'm having trouble. I know that the thing was loaded. My talk was loaded on here, but I don't seem to be able to find it. So if someone could help me with that, and then I'll begin with my lecture, formally speaking. Okay, keep just clicking on it if you would.
Yeah, so this one?
Okay, yeah, that's it. So, where I don't see where the, okay, fine. And then go down, up, okay. The Fulani culture, race, and the body. And I was a Fulbright Fellow at the University of Conakry, the capital of Guinea, and I want to highlight that. And I also want to highlight, I'm getting double exposure. I want to highlight two friends and colleagues in the area, people with whom I worked, people with whom I co-authored. This is one of the things I always do when I work abroad. I always seek to co-author my material. It's one of the things that we don't do enough of, anthropologists. We go and we get data, and very often we get people in the society to collect our data. They tell us all their secrets, and they don't have any recognition. So I'm always very conscious to get them involved, and it's made it a much more enjoyable experience. They still think I'm with the CIA, but you can't worry about that. The Fulani people, they're referred to as the Fulani, in French the Peuls, in German Fulfulde. My discussion is I'm going to start with the body and end with the body, because this is a talk about bodies. And to be in the body that I'm in, and for you to be in the body that you're in, and what does it mean to be in my body? That is, to have my color and my physiognomy and my sense of myself and that which I carry around, the capability of a mind and a heart. What do I think of myself in my body? What do I think of you, not any one of you? What do I think of you in your body? Do I value my body, my physical presence, the way I look, my potential, my emotionality, my intellectuality, more than I value yours? Do I look at your body because it's blue or red or green and tend to think, oh, this person is not worthy, not fulfilling, not someone I'd want to be around, this person is dangerous, this person is unhealthy, green people are just not people I want to be with. Certainly I wouldn't want these people I want my daughter to be with. Okay. So I want to start with the body because that is essentially what I'm going to be talking about. Now, there's no accident that I started out with the body, because I'm a medical anthropologist, and one of the things that I found out was the body is very important to the understanding people's self-identity. And in order to understand the focus of my research, which was malaria, I needed to understand the body. And the more I understand about the Fulani body, the more I realized that I was dealing with the subject of the value that they gave to their body and the different kind of value that they gave to other people's body, and the fact that they saw themselves and they saw others as what we would define, what we in this society would define as two different races. Now, I'm not by any means talking about the fact that they were in fact two different races, or you do a genotype of the group, or you look at them at a color chart like a painter has and say, oh, these have to be different races. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that there was this thing in their heads which says, these other people are not my people. They're a different people. They are a different race. They didn't use the word race. They would maybe say lineage, leñol. They would maybe say different people, but not race. But you'll see what I mean as I continue to talk more about how they saw each other. And what I want you to come away with today, by the time that I've finished my talk, is maybe 3 take-home points. And if I've done my job, you've gotten these take-home points. One is that the things that we see, which we may find disagreeable in the West, in the U.S., and maybe we found yet more disagreeable 20, 30, 40 years ago, or before Brown versus Board of Education, a number of other reforms where it was yet more blatant and drastic. The things that we see in the West, yeah, they happen elsewhere too, and in Africa as well. A second thing that I want you to think about is that this construction of the body as you know, so terribly important in identity. And the third, well, I'll get to that as we go on.
Andy, I think you can use your remote mic there. Is that the
Yeah, if I use my remote, I'm not. I'm just such a critter of habit. I'm sorry, Janice. I can't change. You give me some heads up beforehand, and I'll practice it. But I'm used to looking at a computer screen and talking. So let me be myself, okay? Thanks. I'm going to have material on the slide. It doesn't mean that I'm going to read what's on the slide, but you may want to multitask and read and listen to me at the same time, if this would be agreeable. The time of in Guinea, there were 40% of the population in Guinea. You'll see where that is, and they lived in an area of Guinea called the Fouta Djallon. Now, if I say the word Fouta to you, what does that sound like? It sounds like Fulani. And the Jalon refers to the Jalonke people. So there were both the Fulani and, large numbers of Jalonke people living in this vast area in the middle of Guinea, which used to be forest, primarily forest land, and some degree savanna. And then once Fulani brought in their cows and cleared the land, it became largely grasslands. The Fulani are an ethnic or tribal group. We don't say tribal, but I'm going to say it once. Populous throughout West Africa. We find them in 15 different countries. There are likely 15 million Fulani, 12 million Fulani, 15 different countries. They all speak pretty much the same language with slight variations. And I was very excited to learn the language because I realized if I learned this language, I can talk with people in so many different countries. And yeah, they speak, but it's very tricky sometimes because the same word can have a very different meaning elsewhere. So I got myself in trouble a little bit, but basically the language is pretty much the same. They are a nomadic pastoralist people. That is, they had cows, and they moved about with their cows where there was grasses for their cows to eat. They walked from one end of Africa to the other. They were wanderers. They still see themselves as wanderers. And they came to Guinea, the country of Guinea, which you'll see where it is in a moment, as a result of jihads. Jihads were not born in the 21st century or the 20th century with the Wahhabi and the Taliban and Al-Qaeda. No, jihads have been around as long as the Crusades have been around, as long as people have had religion, and the Fulani had their jihads. They came into Guinea primarily in the 18th century and basically dominated in the country. Okay. Now, where are we talking about? Guinea, let me bring you right where it is. You see the cursor? This is the country of Guinea. One of the things I'm always fascinated by, and one of the things that I really don't think about that much until I look at a map, is how very close South America is from Africa. I mean, they're really rather very close, maybe just a couple hours apart. You wouldn't think that if you call someone, let's say, in Fortaleza over here, you call someone in Liberia, you can call someone, let's say, at noon, and it'll be 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon there. It's really rather close. And it so strongly suggests why 13 times more of the African population wound up in South America as in North America. And is it Henry Louis Gates? Gates? What's his first 2 names? Henry Louis Gates has a recent coverage on that, a recent video on that, which would be well to understand. Okay, so in Guinea, and I said that they walked back and forth, following their cows from country to country. From the on the left side of the slide, you see Senegal, Gambia, Guinea-Bissau, Guinea, Sierra Leone, walking all the way through Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Nigeria, up into Mali, Niger, Upper Volta, which is now Chad. They follow their cows from the 7th to the 15th latitudes north of the equator, usually at an elevation higher than the tsetse fly, and an elevation and northerly to an extent where the land did not become so terribly dry that it was impossible to adequately herd your cows. When the jihads happened, the Fulani settled in 4 specific areas. They settled and implanted their version, their understanding of Islam, and these were in the Sokoto Caliphate of Nigeria, in Masina, Mali, the Futa Jalon, the Jalonke Fulani, and the Futa Toro. And the Futa Toro refers to the Fulani and also refers to Toro. And it's an odd sort of thing, Toro, because the Toro, it comes from the word, Toro comes from the word Toragol, or to beg. And they were called others Torobe, the ones who begged, people who begged. So this whole area now, they're called the Futa Toro, or Fulani from the Toro region. And additionally, as well as being Fulani from the Toro region, they're also called tout couleur. Does anybody know what tout couleur would mean? No? Todos colores? Yes?
All colors.
Well, all colors, yes. And in fact, they were all colors. And this is how they were described by the French, because the French had a very important role in conferring identity, in giving an understanding of who people were. So there were the Futa Toro and the there, but we're concerned principally with the Futa Jalon. And here you see, right here in this area, the Futa Jalon, the majority of the information that I collected came from Conakry, which is where I was working, where I was living, where I was teaching, and where I first had my encounter with West Africa, and where I kept returning, as well as I've worked up here in, I think I've mentioned Kankan. I can't even find Kankan on this map, but it's there, where the Malinke are, and I've worked with the Malinke people. It's been a very interesting experience. I've been working in Mesoamerica more recently, and I can't wait to finish that work so I can get back to Africa. Okay, the Fulani, as I said, are cow herders. I wouldn't be a responsible person if I didn't show what was most important to the Fulani themselves, which is their cows. And we'll look at some cows, and then we'll talk about some people, and talk about bodies, and talk about understanding of self and others, and racism. This is a not atypical scene in the Futa Jalon. Cows just sort of hanging out, and I like to look at cows. I like to be around cows. I find them very comforting to be around. And the houses up there, which are, you know, which are still very much in evidence, the same sort of cows, they call them the Kazrand. And there's no electricity. There is no running water. There's no bathrooms as we know it. Where is the bathroom? I once asked when I first got there. I said, wherever you want. I was a real American when the first time I went there. And cows are in and out of houses, as you can see here. And the cows and the milk from the cows is such an important part of life that when you go and visit someone, one of the first things that they'll do is offer you a bowl of milk. They don't offer you Coke, they don't offer you coffee, they offer you a bowl of milk. And of course my children at the time were continually given milk by all these people and sitting around with bowls of milk, and it was fresh milk, it was fun, it was very pleasant. And here we have some more cows. Okay. Anthropology, shamelessly, we get our information not by questionnaires, not by interviews, though we do that sometimes, formal interviews. The majority of the real guts of our information comes from casual conversation. We overhear things, we sit around people's dinner's table, we go into their homes, we drink with them, we may go to the mosque with them, we may just hang out and chit-chat. And there were three moments in which I was working on this research, where I heard specific things which more or less geared me into what was going on in Guinea. First thing was, I was in a cab. And as I always do, you know, if there's a cab driver, I'm talking with the cab driver. I'll talk with anybody. I'm always doing field work. And we were talking about where we are respectively. I said, I'm born in New York. He said, well, Futa. I'm from the Futa. And the conversation was a mixture between some Fulani and some French. And at one point he said, I'm not a real Fulani. I'm a Balebe. And this was very striking. I'm not a real Fulani. I speak Fulani. I understand the culture. I eat the food, but I'm a Balebe. Okay. The word Balebe means a black person. I'm not a Fulani. I'm not a real Fulani. I'm a black person. Balebe. Bale means black. B-H-E means the people themselves. And what happened, where this word comes from, is a fascinating thing. I said, they told you that the Fulani came down from Mali, largely, into Guinea. They spread out into the Sokoto Caliphate, into the Futa Toro, into Masina, the Futa Jalon. They came to all these places, these settlements. Remember those green islands that I showed you? And what they did is they came into communities, and they came in and dominated these communities through a variety of different mechanisms, which I'm not going to describe here, but just basically point out that through the networks of association which they maintained with other Fulanis, through their superiority in being able to put together people and dominate others and bring Islam with them, they began to take over areas of the Futa Jalon, and they began to dominate small areas so that the people who were living there already, many of them who were Dialonke, others who were Jakanke, or Seri, or Malinke, or Baga, they stopped being all of these things. They took away their language. You had to speak Fulani now. They took away their language. They took away their ethnic identity, and they were called Balebes, which is basically like saying, you're Negroes. I'm going to call you by you, or take away a person's roots, you take their language, you take their culture, and you're concerned with them as parts of your productive process. They became, depending upon where you were and how the Fulani happened to make their settlements, either slaves or serfs. And it goes back and forth what they were. There's still the notion of slave in that society. I remember I was sitting with a friend of mine, his name, Ibrahim Diallo. I was sitting with him, and he was a retired captain in the army, and I went with his cousin to the house. There were about 6 of them getting together. They were planning this funeral procession for someone, a memoriam. And I asked the woman friend of mine who I went with, I said, who's this, who's that, who's this, who's that? There were 6 people there. Oh, he's a slave. I said, what? And yeah, there's still the notion of people being slaves, people being balebe. Now, they don't function as slaves anymore, but they function with a sense of difference and a historical sense that they were different. And still, there is a connectedness. So there's a connectedness between the descendants or children or people who are old who had lived before 1946 as adults, who were still in a period in which slavery was legal. In 1946, with a number of legislative reforms, it became illegal. It didn't really take place until 1958. But it's pretty surprising to realize that slavery itself continued till 1981 in Mauritania as legislatively possible. Okay. The second comment that I heard, which was very striking, is that I was driving from upcountry, or in the interior, into Conakry, listening to the radio with everybody, and I didn't know any Fulani at this point, but I heard long lists of names. I could certainly recognize names. Then I'd hear the name of a country, which I knew, and then I'd hear another list of names. And this went on for a long time, and I said to the guy who was driving the car, I said, what are they talking about? Why are they listing these names? Oh, these are the people who died in the last week. And I thought, my goodness. Here in the country of Guinea, they know about other Fulani who've died in Senegal, in Mali, in Liberia, in Sierra Leone. They have news of this, and there's a connectedness, and I began to understand that there is a sense of unity and a sense of being part of a common, let me say, body politic. We're talking about bodies and talk about politic. Another very interesting, as I say, anecdotes, asides, because that's how anthropologists learn about the world. I was sitting with my friend Binta, and we were just talking about, you know, how Fulani is and how Fulani are and how I am and stuff like that. And she looked at me very squarely, and she said, you know, Andy, we're just like you. I said, oh, okay. Binta, what are you referring to? He said, well, we're just white like you. And she didn't look like many other people in sub-Saharan Africa. But I listened to her because this was how she saw herself. And I took this as a piece of information about the people themselves and the ways that a Fulani may understand themselves. Now, when Fulani describe how they appear, they don't really appear like this, but I'll tell you how these descriptions may intersect with their understanding of self. They say, oh, our skin color is lighter, our noses are narrower, our hair is thinner, our lips are thinner, our color of our eyes is lighter, and so forth. All of these, you know, prototypical examples. Now, in any Fulani population, you may find one or another person with these physical characteristics, but for reasons I'm not sure, it's how they see themselves. It's kind of, you know, varying points in my life. I can remember looking in the mirror, being shocked, I look that fat. The ways in which we think of ourselves. You know, you ever go by a mirror and all of a sudden see yourself and it doesn't, I look like this? Like, it's a terrible thing. But anyway, the idea is the constructs, and we use that word now, the constructs they have of self, Fulani constructs of self, are perhaps different than others might see them, or you as I might see them. Okay, different kinds of constructs of self. We speak about constructs, and there's a number of words that academics like to use when we talk about cultural constructs. We talk cultural constructions, we use the word discourse, we use cognitive schema, we use meta-schema, we use meta-narratives. We use all these words which describe in some larger and grander way how we think of how people think of themselves. And when I talk about cultural constructions today or meta-narratives, you don't know what a meta-narrative is. And I'm sorry I'm using the word here without your fully understanding it. A meta-narrative is like a big story, a master story from which other stories come. In Western culture, we have a meta-narrative. And many of you are asked to read probably 2 books from a blind poet, which are both meta-narratives. What books would those might be? You know what I'm going to say. We read the Iliad and the Odyssey. You read the story of Odysseus. And his meta-narrative, his becoming a person, his going from island to island, his leaving the seductiveness and sexuality of Calypso, and his battling the waves and the tyrants along the way, and the excesses of war, and he becomes a man, and he goes back to his home, to his faithful wife who's been at the spinning wheel for the last 10 years. This is what they call a story of becoming, what they call a Bildungsroman, and from which all kinds of Western narratives have subsequently been written. The idea of the notion of becoming. This is a meta-narrative in Western culture. Fulani too have their meta-narratives, their constructions from which all the stories about themselves flow. Okay, who do the Fulani think that they are? Who do they think they are? Well, part of being, not being African, they say, they don't quite see themselves as part of Guinea. We come from elsewhere, they would tell me. We're not from here. We're not really Africans. We are from India. We're from Israel, maybe. Maybe we're from North Africa. But this is not our place. Look at us. We don't belong here. We come from a different kind of climate, and we're not robust and rugged enough to be able to make it here. We can. This is not our place. We just happen to come here to spread Islam. Here are some pictures of Fulani. This is a picture which is clearly not a straight up and down picture, but I like it so much, and I keep looking at it because, and if you look at it too, you get a sense of what Fulani, you get a sense of the people. Sometimes you look at things long enough and you hear the picture talking to you, and this picture talks to me. Two Fulani merchants in the market. And this is Mr. Diallo, who became a friend, who we would continually joke that we were brother-in-laws. He used to change money for me. This is a money bag on him. And these are Fulani in the Fouta Djallon. A friend of mine, German background, who happened to be tall and thin like this guy, people used to say in Africa to him that he was their white Fulani. But generally there is this sort of Fulani body in which they are taller, thinner, and they say weaker and not nearly so resilient to the environment. These are pictures in the Fouta Toro. These are what they call the Fulani Dieri or the Pulo Dieri. And if you ever happen to, and I hope you'll go to Senegal, and you go out of Senegal, you go north towards Saint Louis, there is a market there where people bring cows, and Fulani from all over West Africa used to bring their cows there. Used to walk their cows there for this international market. And now they truck them in, and these are couple pictures here I have of the market for cows. And you see Fulani from all different countries with different head wraps and different clothes and different customs, but they all talk with one another. It's another picture of the market. And this is a baptism that I was at. Another nice thing about being in Conakry is that whenever you walk out of the house, there's a party going on. There's always a party. There's always music. Someone's getting married. Someone's having a baptism. Someone's having a circumcision or just had. And it's party time all the time, and there's all the time music. And this is, I used to just sort of drop in on these parties and just look around like an anthropologist going where I shouldn't, but it all worked out okay because they figured I didn't know any better. This is a Fulani at the marketplace who would sell roots, bark, and the innards of trees, the sap, from which he would make a variety of medications. And this is the intrepid anthropologist off in the Fouta Djallon with my notebook, smiling always, and maybe I was well received. I hope so. I had a very nice time whenever I was there. And this is a picture of the vast fields of the Fouta. Lovely country, lovely country. It has wonderful air, so much so in the 19th century, if you were tubercular, they would send people off to a place called Labe because the air was so very good for people with tuberculosis. Fulani space. This is very important to understand. Very important. Remember I told you about the Balepe, the black people? Well, the Balepe, they were agriculturalists. And they were sedentary. They didn't go places. And still, they're agriculturalists in Guinea, and they just stay put. Of course, nomadic pastoralists or pastoralists, even transhuman, that is seasonal pastoralists, or people who just herd cattle, they move about. They have no problem moving about and going from place to place. You have the lowlands here where lived the Balebe, the serfs or slaves, and also a sort of like middle social rung between the Balebe and the people up there who you think lived up there, the nobles, the Fulani, the Fulani nobles, whom they called Fulbe. And on the space, on ideas of the space, of, landscapes are part of nature, perhaps. I say perhaps because we do so much to landscapes to make them our own, but very often we write on the landscapes with our mind. We have certain ideas. This is the area on the upper part of the slide. This is the area for the nobles. This is reminiscent of where we came from in northern Africa, the dry areas of northern Africa. Or maybe it was Israel, or maybe it was India. Wasn't here. This is the closest we can get. Down here where it's wet and turns out unhealthy, this is the area for the Balebe. Now, as we look at this up-down kind of difference, we find as well a variety of the world as it's constructed, the narratives of the Fulani. There's the highland, the lowland. Fulbe, which is plural for Fulani, and Balebe, pastoral, agricultural, dry land, wetland, salutary or healthy climate, and polluting climate. Light-skinned, they think of themselves this way, and dark-skinned. Noble, serf, frail. The Fulani were frail, while the Balebe were robust. Fulani would joke, it wasn't true, but they said they didn't even take us as slaves because we were so weak and small. They didn't want us. They were transported as well, and there's some interesting literature and memoirs about people who were slaves who lived in this period. The Fulani saw themselves as carnal, as cerebral, thoughtful, intellectual, bringing Islam. The Balebe were strong, but they didn't have the same attitudes. Islamic, the highlands, animist, lowlands. Highlands, sickly body versus lowlands, resistant body. These oppositions. And a series of schematic oppositions provide a cognitive map. A cognitive map, how the world is seen, which is superimposed on the landscape. But I was thinking primarily about malaria. No one's going to pay me to go study racism in Africa or racial categories in Africa. No one's going to pay me to do that. I'm not an expert in this. But I learned a lot, and maybe they would pay me now, but there's no reason for me to do this because I've already been. I went there to study malaria. And in order to study malaria, I learned a lot about racial understandings, or understandings of self, identity, the body, and how the body plays such an important role here. It started out with an understanding of the word bu, B-H-U-U. Bu refers to wetness, coldness. And once I learned the word bu, it took me on a linguistic adventure, which I didn't imagine that I would get on when I was starting this research. From bu, the wetness, you had wetness in the soil. Now, where do we find wetness on that map? Where would you think we find wetness? What? The lowlands. The lowland was wet, and the lowlands were unhealthy. You find bu down there. And then bu itself enters the body. The wetness enters the body. Illness enters the body and enters in it with a word called burudan. Bu enters the body and it becomes burudan. And I don't want to get too heavy into that, but it's a mixture between coldness and wetness and water entering the body and water liquid, which is called dian. Okay. So you have burudan, which goes into the body, becomes internalized in the body, from which all illnesses flow. And you find that the first part, the root of this, bu, added on other word endings, other inflections, transformations, modifications on the root, additions, such that you find, from bu, from the water going inside, you can get a boil, budi, you can get a tumor or a goiter in your neck, which is called bole. You can have a swelling of the arms, which they'll call bulal. You can get a rash, which is called bule. You can get an enlarged stomach, or enlarged heart, or enlarged liver, which is called bubaru. You can get a variety of problems which happened below the waist, called buri nuru. No one knew what the hell nuru was. I asked a lot of people, what is nuru? And they said, I don't know, it's part of a disease. But part of the understanding of nuru comes by looking at the word. Nuru is an Ngo word, Ngo. There are 24 different cases in Fulani language. 24 different cases. I mean, in French, Spanish, we have le and la, or el and la. But in Fulani, there's 24. And Ngu refers to small round objects. So buri nuru is probably buri, the wetness with small round objects. And the best I was able to make sense of this is that the wetness, the sort of slime, congeals, and it causes a congestion, such that buri nuru is associated with constipation, hemorrhoids, infertility, blockages. There's buri dupatodi, hernia, hemorrhoids, the state of being sick, burugol. And all of this comes from dynamics of bu, which is bundu, a spring of water, butingol to make swollen, bubingol to make damp, or no buti, it springs forth. Now, why am I going through all of these damn things? Why talking about so many different inflections of bu? Well, the constructions, the understandings we have, which are very much related, as you'll see, to people, they infiltrate all parts of language. And language itself changes and thoughts change as well, anchored in central conceptions of wetness and people and wetness. And one of the things I want to point out, the third thing that I want to point out, is that our constructions of self, of race, are kind of like all over our body, all over our mind, all over our mind. They infect so many domains of our thinking. One cannot just have identity or be racist perhaps in one area, but the ways in which a word like bu is continually inflected. And there's so much imagination and so much creativity and so much dynamism in thinking and language that it pretty much takes over the whole language. We'll get into this in just a moment and we'll find out why bu is important.
Andy, I hate to interrupt you.
Yeah.
We're running out of time.
Is Tilly here yet?
Yes.
Okay, fine. We'll be through in 10 minutes? Okay. The Fulani have a place in the social order, higher social order, lower social order. The Fulani say that their buri, the disease of buri, is their disease. This is our disease. This is our problem. The Balebe, who are on the lower land, do not suffer from buri. Buri becomes our disease. We are the ones who are susceptible. Here are some pictures from the Runde, where the Balebe lived. And here is a picture of healing. What they would do in healing is you point to a picture which indicates the disease you have, and many of these refer to different buri diseases. Now, buri is the disease of the Fulani, what they must suffer in Guinea, in the Fouta-Djallon. Malaria, as I found, is the problem when burudan resides in the gut without being expelled without being expelled. In other words, malaria is a form of buri. If one is fortunate enough to vomit, then there's no more malaria, but as long as it stays in the gut, then malaria stays with one. Malaria is the Fulani disease par excellence. Uniformly say that malaria is their disease, buri is their disease. They get this disease because they are in the country. The Susu next door say that malaria is fulakoka, the thing of the Fulani. In the nearby country of Gambia, it's said that Fulani are the ones who are responsible, the vectors of disease. The latter one's skin, the more they'll be inclined to suffer from buri and also malaria. They are what they call kita solo, fragile. The problem of being light-skinned is most strongly felt by women who become, when they're sick, grouchy, discontent, retire to the beds, reminding one of the 19th century aristocratic women. This is the key to the point, and I'm going to end on several related points to sickness and susceptibility. It's, on the one hand, the sickness of the Fulani, but on the other hand, counterpointing this sickness is the idea of the Fulani being able to overcome the sickness, to being able to overcome adversity. The way of being Fulani is to have courage in the face of adversity, wakilari, they said, both in meeting challenges to the body and in the political challenges. There is the notion of being courageous, of overcoming, which the Fulani see as central to them. To be Fulani is to disregard the needs of the body, and this means illness, hunger, emotions, fatigue. Buri, malaria, the frailness of the body of the Fulani in this new area is overcome by them in the same way that they overcome the political, economic challenges. They make fun of others who need to eat, to sleep, like music too much, because they are, above all, stoic and dominant. There's the Fulani ethic of these varying characteristics, which you can read, which describes them: leadership, dignity, shame, having a good appearance, being shy, patient, and brave, all of which describe the Fulani ideal. Ultimately, the Fulani become triumphant. Outsiders, weaker, different. They're because of jihads of a different race, but they become triumphant in overcoming the sicknesses which they suffer and also the political economic challenges in front of them. Now, the last things I'm going to say is, as the Fulani penetrated into the Futajano, we find that there is this relationship between the leadership among them and the followers, relationship between and among the Fulani themselves, like the sap of a tree, they would say. There is the inclination to manage personal resources in a way that is cunning and leads to dominance in theocracies and also in secular governance. And they draw on racial ideas. The body, more importantly, what is impressed on the body, what they see in the body, guides thinking about self. In other words, the body is the source, the template, the projection, the light on which they see the world. Fulani go through cycles of adversity, triumph, marginality, centrality, being exposed, then covered, humiliated, and overcoming humiliation. This is the generation of Fulani life. Victor Azaria points out the dominance of the Fulani in various areas. They just came in and took over, and they still keep this inclination towards political dominance. Conclusions. The Fulanis answered life's questions. Who am I? Who am I in my body? Who are my people, and how are we different than others? This, as I said, the take-home points, this happens in sub-Saharan Africa. Fulani ideas of racial superiority extends into their language, in words for disease. It goes very deeply everywhere. Finally, we see how images of self and the body may demand certain behaviors of oneself, that is, overcoming, and all other people belonging to that group. The way we think of ourselves, think about this please, leave with this idea. The way we think of ourselves and our body, what our bodies are capable, what our minds are capable, and the way we think about others, their bodies, we look at a body, green, blue, or purple, and what we think of them, this is the heart, I suggest, that the Fulani story says, not simply about racism, but about the way they conduct their interpersonal lives and the ways in which they have achieved dominance over both the things that threaten them, the challenges of illness, and also the challenges of political domination. Okay, I'll end here and we can go on.
Thank you.